Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast. You know, every week I'm so fortunate. I get to talk with CEOs, founders, speakers, entrepreneurs, executives of companies and organizations like YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, Act Software, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And I'm excited today because my guest is Steve Sapato. Now, Steve, he's been a professional speaker and corporate trainer for almost 40 years. He traveled the United States, all kinds of different directions, several times over these years, and now is really helping people to speak better based on that experience. His latest project is called SpeakerTalks Events, which are the professional alternative to TEDx, where speakers get on stage and share their message and expertise to become more visible, get a professionally recorded speaking reel. He also, and this is really interesting, we're going to be talking about this in this episode, is the founder of Virtual Speakers, where he trains you to become a virtual presenter, something that is incredibly valuable right now. So we're going to dive into some of the best practices, and I'm going to try and not violate all of those things that you're not supposed to do during the course of this interview. But first, before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media. Now, look, I don't need to tell you the world has changed. We all know that. The next question is, what do you do about it? And, you know, one of the things you can do is become a better presenter, because we're all presenting virtually right now, and we're going to be talking about that. But also, in this economy, it's more important than ever to be able to connect and build strong relationships with clients, with referral partners, with strategic partners, even when you can't be face-to-face. And so what we do at Rise 25 is we have 20 years of experience in the B2B space, connecting and building profitable relationships with clients, referral partners, and strategic partners. And the way that we do that now is with a podcast. We've helped hundreds of B2B businesses to get more clients, referrals, and land collaborations with dream clients. So if you want to learn more about that, go to rise25media.com, or you can also email us at support@rise25media.com. All right, Steve, so I'm excited to dive into this topic with you of virtual presentations. And I should mention first, we're recording this in mid-August of 2020. The COVID-19 global pandemic is by no means resolved, unfortunately. Still happening. We're covering up our faces so that we don't infect each other from 3,000 miles away. You're in Florida. I'm in California, fortunately. So I don't. Hopefully, it won't get transmitted over Zoom. And while this has been happening, people have needed to, continue to move on with their lives. And people, as I mentioned in the intro, they like connecting with people, like building relationships. And people are doing more content, more connection, more presentations over Zoom, over video conference than ever before. And so let's start with talking about some best practices and some mistakes that you see people make when it comes to virtual presentations in the business context. And so let's just stop there. Start right there. What kinds of things are you seeing people doing that are best practices?
Well, I think the primary one is, even before we got into COVID, it was how to properly run a meeting. That's vital to your success. And so when I see people starting their summits or starting their meetings, I mean, I've sat in on many business meetings over these last few months, and the people actually have no clue how to run a meeting. And that's vital, because if you say, hey, we're going to be here for 45 minutes or we're going to be here for an hour, it's just like any speaking gig that we have to give. If somebody says, Steve, I need you to speak for 55 minutes, I can't speak for 30 and say, okay, I'm done, because it messes up what they wanted to do. And I certainly can't speak for an hour and 20 minutes, because then they're upset, right? Because I'm taking away too long. And that's true with every meeting. So when you get into a meeting, set your agenda, follow the agenda, make sure that everybody in there knows the agenda, and don't be afraid to cut people off. We were talking here briefly earlier and said, Yeah, what do you do about the people who, you've got 7 minutes to talk and then they're still talking at 8 minutes? And my policy is absolutely dead set, which is you have 7 minutes. At 7 minutes, I'm cutting you off. Now, I will say your time's up. And if you don't stop in the next 10 or 15 seconds, I will simply mute you if I'm in charge of the meeting. Mute you. You're done. Have a great day. If you keep talking, like you didn't see or hear anything, then we will drop you from the screen. It's really important that people understand how vital the minutes are in this kind of thing now. Yep, some people get on meetings and they palaver around and they do this. Be succinct. Know your agenda. Know your speakers. Know what you're supposed to accomplish and follow those time restrictions. Vital to be successful in a meeting. Then when we talk about being able to present, you have to have your stuff in front of you. Don't be afraid of not reading it. You can read it. Now, here's the caveat to that. If I'm reading the paper and I want you to follow the rule, no. You should know what you have to say well enough that what you've got to read is just a highlight. You say, hey, I know that we have to cover this, and then you glance at your paper and cover that and cover this. To be a great presenter, you have to have practiced. And some people say, well, Steve, I go from one meeting to the next meeting. Good, then you better get real good at the impromptu. You better be real good at following the agenda. You better be real good at keeping other people on the agenda. And you better be entertaining. You better know what your face does. You better know what your gestures do. You better know what your voice does. Because if you're on here and we're talking, I have a lot of people who tell me, Steve, you don't understand. All my material is boring. And my signature phrase is, nope, your material is dry. You're boring. And that's the way it works. So that's the primary on any meeting.
Let's talk about that point about people reading. I'm a former speechwriter, and so I've talked to so many people about speeches and what people like and don't like. And that one thing, hearing someone read a script, gets under people's nerves like nothing else. Why do you think that is, that people get so offended when a speaker reads?
I think it shows lack of preparation and lack of professionalism. I think that's what they're looking at. When you hear somebody, I've got a great friend, and when she starts off her podcast or her, whatever her hour-long show is, she reads the intro, and the intro is only like 3 sentences long. You shouldn't have to be reading it when you get into that. It should be, boy, I've got to memorize by the second or third time down. And if you mess up a word or two, no big deal. But if you glance at it, you say, hey, I'm Steve Sapato, and you're going to be working with SpeakerTalks, and you're going to be working with virtual presenters today. And I just want you to, and all that could have been written down, and all I got to do is glance at it to know exactly where I was going. Does it have to be the same script every time? No. So the fact that people read, Haley, who's President Trump's spokesperson,
Press secretary,
she has a ton. Now, I don't know if she's got somebody in her ear or what, but she has a ton of information that she pulls out. When somebody pulls up a weird question over here, she can pull out a couple pieces of paper, glance at it, and talk to you about what's in that piece of paper. That shows she really knows her stuff.
Yeah, that takes a lot of organization. Actually, I saw a few weeks ago, there was a picture. One of the photographers had seen her briefing book, and she came out with a briefing book that had tabs down the side, so that as someone started to ask about any particular topic, she could immediately flip to it and look at her talking points and then answer it. And I think that's a great way, especially for someone who needs to be able to respond on the fly to a variety of different topics.
Absolutely. And it's vital that you as a speaker or a presenter don't get caught in the I'm reading, because reading does come across differently. I could pick up a book here and I'll just, it could come across as, people do not live on bread alone. People need food for the spirit, as I'm reading that, even if you don't see me on camera. So if you said, hey, people don't live on bread alone, people need food for their existence. I already picked that up and carried it through. You can do that if you prep properly for your talk. So many people think they can just get on camera and pull it off, and it's hard to do.
Let's talk about that, because when it comes to practicing an actual speech, typical advice are, maybe if you're going to give an actual speech, to go down to the room where you're going to speak, to actually stand on the stage, walk in front of the podium, know where everything's located. That's the kind of advice that you get. How are things different for preparing for a virtual speech or virtual presentation in terms of practicing?
Well, first of all, I want you to understand, when I first started speaking 40 years ago, one of the reasons I started was because I saw other people speaking. I said, I can do that, right? I've been trained as a salesperson by IBM. I'd been in high school theater, and I said, I can do that. What I didn't get was, if you're going to be hired, like now, if I'm hired for a $10,000 keynote talk, I spend 2 months preparing for that talk, not that talk and that talk and that talk. 2 months preparing for that talk. You have to know your stuff. You have to know how good it is, and that it hits the mark, and they're using the right words, the right verbiage. You got to know your pace. You got to know, and I don't want to say Toastmasters type stuff, because Toastmasters scripts out where your hand goes and when it goes. But as a professional speaker, you have to be much more natural than that. But you have to do all that. And so when you're preparing for a virtual talk, it's the same thing here. Notice how my hands are up here. Now, in real life, my hands would never be right up here by my face. But that's one of the things you have to learn to do when you're in front of the camera, which is, when do you bring your hands up, right? When I want you to see that I'm snapping my fingers, then I bring my hand up. I don't need to bring my hands up most of the time, but especially for emphasis. If I want you to know something, I have to bring my hands up into the camera. So all of that is still part of what you have to practice. So as a matter of fact, my clients that I have right now, we do online stuff. They have to send me something at least every other week, if not every week, on assignments that I give them. And we talk about how their gestures have to come and what they have to do. Now, I prep them both ways for the online, and I have to prep them because 6 months from now, they might get called to do on stage. So they have to do a full, back up, let the camera take them full body in their living room, wherever they might be, and how they move, right? How they move from point to point on the stage. When you come back to virtual, you've got a box, but you have to move in that box so it catches people's attentions. Again, if all I did was sit here and just talk to you, and I didn't have a great voice, I was kind of monotone, you'd get tired of listening to me. And so it becomes my job to use my face, my hands, and all the gestures. And it's practice, practice, practice. Do everything. I had a photographer at my last event, and it was interesting that we got to have a conversation. And he said, as a professional photographer, it's always tough to get people just to do a headshot type thing. He says, because people aren't comfortable. And I said, is that why they always stick their tongues out when they're doing selfies or party? He goes, so many people aren't comfortable with themselves on camera in a picture that they do that funny face, or they stick their tongue out, or they exit what one of those things has bunny ears and bunny eyes that pop out at you. And that's because people aren't comfortable. You want to get noticed. You want to become visible. You want to get the promotion. You want to be more successful. You want people to see you as a success, as a confident individual. Get comfortable on camera.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you've done well is you're fully in the center of the screen. Your face is close to the camera. You're looking directly into the camera. There's so many people that you connect with them, and they're, the camera's over here, and they're down in the bottom of the corner of the screen, and you see their whole window, and it's blinding light from the sun. They haven't thought through those sorts of pieces.
Yeah, and that's, the environment is vital. I actually pulled up a green screen here today for the first time. I ordered one, put it up, and it didn't cover the back wall on my camera. On Zoom, it might, but on StreamYard that I normally use, it didn't. So I decided not to use it for my purposes, at least here. I might use it out in the other room. But you have to look at your background. If you see, I've got pictures right over there. I got all kinds of, those are personal pictures, right? And a lot of people get distracted by personal pictures. Or if I've got a ceiling fan here, and when that ceiling fan is running,
that can be very
distracting.
Reflection.
Oh yeah, you see the reflection there, and you're like,
or sometimes it's even in the screen. I've had conversations where I know my wife gets nauseated if a ceiling fan is anywhere in her line of sight.
That is, and it's true. You have to think of your audience all the time. I've got a new book coming out. It's called Shut Up and Succeed. And it's all about how you have to think of your audience all the time, whether it's my wife as my audience, whether it's John as my audience, whether it's you folks as my audience. I have to always be considerate of the people in my audience. So like you said, what if somebody gets motion sick, right? I mean, some of the movies that are out now, they have that, I'll say point of action, where the camera goes running through the bushes after these people.
Yeah.
And I can't, I have to turn away. I go, it makes me motion sick.
Yeah.
And so you have to be aware of what your audience really wants from you. And that's vital. That was a really good point.
And, one thing, it seems like every speaker, and maybe you're one of them, every speaker has a story of, not knowing their audience well enough. You're probably too good to have a story of that. But I've heard professional speakers tell a story of, they went in, they did a speech, and they didn't know some key fact like that the audience knew, like the president of the company who just introduced them had an affair and everyone knew about it, but they didn't know about it. And so oftentimes you hear, speakers say, you got to get to know your audience. So beforehand you go, you talk to people. What are your tips for virtual presentations, getting to know your audience?
Well, and it's a lot tougher now, because typically if I'm out going to do a keynote, I will go to the cocktail party the night before. The cocktail party where I get to ask everybody, talk to everybody. They don't know I'm the speaker tomorrow. I don't introduce them as myself as a speaker for tomorrow. I introduce myself as just somebody who was invited, and I find out who's the jokester, what's some of the best jokes, what's some of the best stories, who can I not joke with, right? And so you find out, hey, what do you think of the CEO who's going to be introducing me tomorrow? What do you think of them? And they're like, oh man, they're sticking them. And then you go meet them, and it turns out they're really nice people. And you ask them, like, hey, Joanne, may I call you Joanne? She goes, oh, absolutely, you can call me Joanne. Great. So when you walk out on stage, you can say, hey, thanks to Joanne for introducing me this way, right? And everybody in the audience goes, wow, he knows Joanne, right? Mm-hmm. Or he knows Mrs. Schmidt, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's like on a first name basis. So you just raise your credibility. When you're doing virtual, it's important that you talk to the person hosting before the event and find out who they've invited, right? Sometimes you might even get names. Hey, what do they do? How do they do it? If you're going to be marketing yourself or products, it's one thing if you're just going to be giving information. Like if somebody said, hey, Steve, I want you to come on and just talk about being a virtual presenter. I can talk for 7 minutes on being a virtual presenter, and hopefully those people will then reach out to me as the expert to learn more. But if I'm going out there to market my product, so I want you to buy my course on virtual presentation, then I'd be able to say, hey, again, I'll use Joanne. Hey, Joanne, you're a such and such, and you probably need, to talk to the people all the time and get them won over to your side. And she's like, oh yeah. You go, how do you do that now, right? And then you take 30 seconds to listen to how she's not doing it now. And you say, we probably should get together, blah, blah, blah. But because I can single them out, it's one thing that I can reach out to a lot of. Now, if there's 124 people on it, maybe finding out who the top people are that everybody would know, like they've been on the last 7 summits that this person has given. So everybody knows John, everybody knows Bob, everybody knows Carol. And so I might say, hey, Carol, this is what we're doing. You agree with that? And Carol, and she goes, yeah. You go, see, now you've won Carol to your side and 10 people who love Carol. So the virtual presentation part is all about still knowing your audience and learning how, and certainly not saying anything that could offend them or upset them. Politics is probably the one thing, politics and religion now, is you stay away from like the plague. And so you wouldn't want to bring that stuff up in a virtual presentation, no matter what you're doing.
Right. What about, what are you seeing in terms of fear of speaking? As they say, it's one of the biggest fears out there. A lot of people are deathly afraid of getting on stage. Are you finding that it's easier for people in this virtual world we're in right now?
I found I'm looking at my flickering screen. Does my screen flicker to you?
It was a little bit, yeah.
I don't have a fan on or anything. I'm trying to figure out whether I hope it's not the camera on my on my computer going out, right? But when you talk about fear of public speaking, that used to be, well, now in the days of the selfies and the days of TikTok and the days of, wow, that's really changed. What they are afraid of is being stupid on screen. So if they're trying to give a presentation, that's when they really start to reach out and look for help. And it's really important. I mean, there's lots of people who are still afraid of talking on screen. And I tell those people all the time, go do a Facebook Live. Just go do it, right?
Yeah.
Yep, you're going to make mistakes. That's erasable. You don't have to save it. So if you're on for a minute and a half and you make all kinds of mistakes, only those 4 people who saw you on Facebook Live in that minute and a half will know that you screwed that up.
Mm-hmm.
Go out, get the experience, right? In terms of the people who are still afraid, it's just a matter of confidence. So you bring them on sometimes. So I'll bring them on with me to speak. I say, hey, and Carol, what do you think of that? And, Carol's like, but after, when you're talking about their expertise, it helps. They're not just up there trying to give a talk. They're just talking about their expertise. Carol, what's the best way to do SEO, on a website? And Carol goes, oh, well then, and then she's off and running for like 3 or 4 minutes. Then you say, thanks a lot for your expertise. And then when they're done, they're always like, wow, that was easier than I thought. You go, yep, if you stick to your expertise. And that's what is the giant challenge with speaking virtually. If you're leading a meeting, don't try and tell Bob, who's the expert on SEO, about SEO. Ask him about SEO. If your expertise is how to run a meeting properly, you say, my expertise is in how to run a meeting properly. That's why they brought me here. So please, follow my guidelines. We'll all get along fine. Everybody goes, oh, so they're expert in that. So it's really important that when we talk about fear of public speaking, that most people are comfortable getting on making faces to the camera, doing their TikToks and jumping around and dancing. It's when you try and nail them down to be more serious that they start to get afraid, because they're afraid you're going to look at them as opposed to the class clown type thing. You're going to look at them and go, well, Steve doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always going to get that. I was just on a podcast with somebody earlier, and it was really funny because we were both speakers. And I said, have you ever had the people come up to you afterwards and go, you're not that great a speaker. I could do better. And when the first time I got that, I went, wow, that was pretty mean. And then you realize that all they were looking for is, hey, I want to become a speaker too, but I don't know how to approach this speaker, or they
so it came out kind of in an awkward way.
Awkward way. And you're like, So,
Yeah.
and that's what you have to do. You have to take the good with the bad, and people are going to take pot shots at you.
Right. I wanted to ask you, there's people talk about Zoom burnout, and, right now it's been 5-6 months into this pandemic, and people are, it's really hard to capture people's attention a lot of times in these virtual presentations, especially if they're multi-hour long. What are some creative ways you're seeing people do presentations that are capturing people's attention? Is it, being interactive? Is it adding a poll to your presentation? I'm hearing stories about companies, and I've participated in some events where they mail you something beforehand, physical in the mail, that's part of the presentation. What are some, creative solutions you've seen?
Actually, all of those are real good. If you're talking about a business presentation, then absolutely you have to have a way to keep your people engaged. I call myself, if you go to Facebook, I've got an engaging speakers group. And it's really vital that you understand what it takes to keep someone engaged. So if I was doing a presentation, my whole presentation would be about asking them questions. What I said before is the material's dry, but you're boring. And you can take any material and make stories out of it. I was a real estate appraiser for 20 years. I could teach classes on real estate appraising by asking the questions and telling stories so that they understood that the answer to this was XYZ, right? Mm-hmm. And it didn't have to be boring and just, like you say, read the material. Yep, you got to cover all this. But covering that is not memorizing or reading it. And so the same thing happens if you're in a corporate setting trying to keep your people engaged. Then first of all, you have to talk to them. You have to ask them personal questions. Like I would always be going, hey, John, what do you think of this idea? And you might say, oh, that's a good idea, blah, 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 blah. And I go, great. And then I go, Karen, what do you think? So that, you never know when somebody's going to call on you, right? You ever have that in school where, she says, I'm going to call on 6 students. And you're all like,
how about not one of them?
I don't know the answers. But it kept you on your toes because you were like, oh, and you were actually hiding or doing something else. So in that sitting, if you're always engaging your staff, it's vital. And don't, like you say, don't prattle on. Talk 3 or 4 minutes and then have somebody else say something. Ask somebody else questions. If you're going to talk for 15, 20 minutes, you're talking way too long. So if you're talking about summits and online webinars, that type of thing, then you better have a niche. Like you said, early on, I participated in some of these where they had 124 people on this 6-hour, event. And it was like, oh my gosh. Because first of all, the people had 20 minutes to get to their talk, and they would prattle on. I don't know of a better way to say it, except they didn't get to the point. What's your point? What do you have? If you want to sell me something. But I didn't come here to listen to you talk about all this other stuff.
Yeah.
I came to listen to the expertise. And so find your niche. And then if you're running one of these, make sure you say, hey, from, what do we got? 4:35 my time. From 4:30 until 5:30, we're going to have people, doesn't have to be necessarily Steve Sapato or John Corcoran. We're going to have 2 people talking about how to right? The niche, how to make the best cup of coffee ever. Ooh, I might show up for that one, right? And so
sounds good to me.
And understand that if every hour you said, this is what I'm doing, then I get to pick which. I mean, we do that when we did big speaking events. If I'm not the keynote speaker, I would hope that I would be picked for one of the breakout sessions. And so the keynote speaker came on at 8 o'clock in the morning, talked till 9 o'clock in the morning. And then they had a couple other things from the business do this. And then from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, 11:30 were breakout sessions. And you got to pick from 20 different people who were speaking. What's their topic? You looked at them. And if you picked, and if you said, oh, I want to see this. So there's only 40 seats. Sometimes you'd have 60 people wanting to get into that room, and they'd stand around. And then the other guy who didn't title his, who didn't hit the niche right, he'd have 8 people. So you're sitting there with 60, they're sitting there with 8, right? Just the way it is. You have to know how to title, how to bring people in, how to hold their attention, how to entertain them.
Mm-hmm. I've done presentations where, it's 10 or 20 people and everyone's muted and it's hard to get feedback from the audience. And then I've also done presentations where it's a much larger community. And even if you ask people a question, there's so many comments that it goes flying by. It's hard to get feedback that way. So how in this virtual world that we live in, do you get feedback from the audience? Because you seem like the type of person who, when you're giving a speech, you're looking at people's faces, you're getting feedback in real time, or you're asking them questions, getting feedback in real time. So you're getting a feel for whether something's landing or not. So how do you get feedback in this virtual world we're in?
Actually, it's a lot easier than most people think. So first of all, if I'm going to be doing any kind of a summit where I've got 12 to 50 people on, I better have somebody else who's looking for that, down at the bottom. I don't know if we've got it here. Let me look. We got chat and reactions, okay? But chat, so if you click on that, then a sidebar will open. Sometimes there's just a raised hand, right?
Yeah.
So if you look there, there's a raised hand, so you can see it on their screen. And so you as the presenter have to be looking at, and that's one of the disadvantages. If you've got more than, I think they can fit 20 to a screen now. Something like 20 people can fit on a screen. Any more than that, they go to separate screens. So if I was on one where there were 124 participants.
Wow.
And so you had to scroll over, right? So somebody else should be reading the chat where somebody says, hey, I have a question, right? Or I have a question about. And if you set the expectations right from the beginning, right? And anybody who comes 10, 15 minutes late loses out. They're just out because they don't know how to ask the right questions. They don't know how to raise their hand. But sometimes it's a matter of, hey, if you have something to interject, and I'm going to ask all the participants to keep your interjections to 1 minute or less. If you talk more than 1 minute, I'm going to mute you and go on. We clear on that? Everybody should be going like this, right? And so if you've got 24 people sitting in this square, you say, so if you've got something that you want to ask, raise your hand. Just do this. I'll see your hand. Raise your finger. Just sit there with your finger up for a second. And when I look over, I might say, okay, gotcha, Steve, and then go on with my stuff until I'm ready to invite you in to speak, and then I unmute you. Like you said, I've been on some of these where they don't mute anybody, and everybody's got their microphones open, and
it's horrible.
And you want to go, stop. And so as the organizer, you have to understand your job. And your job, because everybody doesn't read the chat. A lot of people never look at the chat. So you have to make sure you say, hey, look at the chat, or go here to the chat. You guys see where the chat's at. So when you start the whole thing, you've got it all laid out. So then people know, hey, if you want to ask a question on the chat, put it over there. Steve will be reading it off as we go, and we'll get to your questions because he'll be writing them down. So we'll make sure we try and get to all the questions that come up. We may not, but we'll try to. If you've got an immediate question that needs to be answered, just raise your hand, raise your finger, put it like that, right? And please, I will ask you, I'll say, Steve, you're going to be up in about 30 seconds. And then when I'll finish my comment, then I'll click unmute and I'll go, Steve, you're up. Steve should be ready. He doesn't have to go, I forgot what I was doing, or I don't know where to unmute. No, none of that. Come on, let's get it together. The other part of being on these summits or being on these webinars or events is that you're always prepared. You're dressed right? You don't come in slobby. You're paying attention. Gosh, I can't tell you how many times I've watched experts,
Mm-hmm.
Are you taking a nap, Steve? What are you doing there? I can't tell if you're awake or not. And people expect you to recognize them and maybe want to do business with you later. I don't want to do business with somebody who's not interested in what's going on. If you're done with this session, leave. Put the thing over that says I'm not available right now, right?
Yeah.
And I don't recommend that either, because so many people slide that over like they're going to eat or drink coffee or whatever they do. Do it right here. You know what? When I've got a cup of coffee, I want you to know I'm still paying attention. It's really vital that John knows he has my attention. And how better to show him he has my attention than to ask him a question. If you ask questions, you show your interest. You also show your knowledge. I mean, don't ask him a stupid question that everybody knows the answer to and you're trying to show off. That's not what I'm talking about. If I have a specific question, on how Rise 25 really brings together podcasters, then I will ask him that question, and then I'll go, thanks a lot, John. I really appreciate your response.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else? I realized I bounced around a lot there, but before we wrap things up, I just wanted to give you the opportunity. Is there anything else we haven't talked about in terms of virtual presentations, best practices, or mistakes to avoid that we haven't talked about?
I don't think so. Just on the virtual presentation stuff, it's really important that you separate yourself from the crowd on how you're going to be an exceptional presenter in today's COVID world. Getting a virtual certification on being a great presenter, a virtual presenter, is going to be really vital a month from now, 3 months from now, 5 months from now, because even next year, we're going to be doing a whole lot of stuff virtual, because now all the companies realize I don't have to spend any money to send you on a plane to a hotel. We're going to do it all virtually.
That's going to last even longer, right?
Yeah, because the company's they're going to put money in their pocket.
Yeah.
So you showing your boss that you did the extra work, that you did the extra effort and got certified as a presenter is going to talk volumes for you.
And where can people go to learn more about that? I'm jumping a little ahead, but where can people go to learn?
Actually, just drop me an email right now. We're putting the certification together. Our classes will start in September. So they should call me or write to me at steve@stevesapato.com. Or if you drop me an email, I'll send you my phone and we can have a whole conversation about it.
Okay. Steve@stevesapato, SAPATO.com. Yep. And all right, I want to wrap things up with the question I always ask, which is, Steve, let's pretend we're at a virtual presentation, much like a virtual Oscars or a virtual Emmys or something like that. You're receiving an award for lifetime achievement for everything you've done up until this point. And what we all want to know is, who do you thank? Who are the mentors? Who are the friends? In addition to family and friends, who are the coaches? Who are the business partners? Who are the people that you would acknowledge in your remarks?
Wow, that's really deep. I mean, it really is, because I go back decades. An English teacher, let's go back to high school. An English teacher who I was failing English. There were 3 of us in English class who were going to be failing English, which means we wouldn't graduate high school. And she said, Mr. Sapato, Mr. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, do you want to pass? You have to pass English in order to do this. The only way you're going to pass is if you go take extra credit. We're like, oh man. And she said, and the only way you're going to do that is go down and try out for the school play. Right? And she said, so everybody's going to go down and try out for the school play. Raise your hand if you're going to go try out. And the other 2 guys raise their hands. And I sat there like this. I'm like, I'm not trying out for a play. That's stupid. Right? And she said, Mr. Sapato, I'm going to call your mother. I went, okay, I'll go try out. Right? And that actually changed my life in one respect, because I went down, got a little teeny part. Before the play happened, I got a secondary, like second to the lead type part, and really got comfortable with speaking in front of people. I mean, I was like everybody else, scared to death when you first started, especially as a senior in high school. From there, I moved forward and went to IBM, got sales training, which was really good. But it wasn't until age 29 when I started an Amway business. And that Amway business, miserable failure of a business, except that I got the best training from people like Earl Nightingale, Zig Ziglar, Tom, I can't even remember Tom's last. Anyway, all these wonderful speakers that they used to bring in, I don't know if they still do or not, but used to bring in and talk on stage. And that fired my jets for being a speaker. But I also learned a ton from them, learned all kinds of wonderful things from these amazing speakers who wrote great books that you bought the books, you read the books, you listened to their CDs, you listened to all their stuff. And that's what we get to do now for free on podcasts and all this other stuff. So I think when you get into talking about those kind of things, and then recently my coach, Elena Rahrig, R-A-H-R-I-G, has really helped me focus more in terms of who I want to help and why I want to help them. I'm 71 years old. I've made money, I've lost money, and I've had enough money. And all I want to do now is help other people have enough money, learn their careers, grow their businesses, and help them create the success that they want.
That's great.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's great. Steve, where can people go learn more about you?
SteveSapatoSeminars.com. SteveSapatoSeminars.com is the best place. You can certainly write to me at steve@stevesapato.com. And both those places, I'll be happy to answer questions or work with you.
All right, great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.